Hello, everyone, and welcome to the ISO 56001 for Innovation Management Certification webinar. I'm very happy to see everybody join. And yeah, I want to just briefly introduce myself. My name is Leonardo Varela-Cid. I'm CEO of InnovationCast. I've been working on innovation management for almost 15 years. To tell you a little bit about InnovationCast, InnovationCast is an innovation management software that companies across the globe use to engage people to co-create ideas and bring them to life. InnovationCast is a member of this ISO's working group, and our software platform supports the requirements. So that makes certification much easier for our customers. And just to let you know that this webinar is organized by InnovationCast, IPQ, the Portuguese Quality Institute, and the ISO Technical Committee 169. And I'm very, very pleased to introduce our speaker, Peter Merrill. Peter Merrill is a keynote speaker on innovation. He has keynoted conferences in cities such as Dubai, Mumbai, and Shanghai. He began his career in R&D in a major UK corporation, and later, as chief executive of a leading design brand in that corporation, he led innovation in one of the most demanding markets. He's one of North America's foremost authorities on management systems, which he has implemented in such innovative companies as IBM, AIG, and BlackBerry. He was founding chair of the innovation division at ASQ, the American Society for Quality, and is currently a member of the board of directors of ASQ. He is international project lead on ISO 56001, the new auditable innovation standard. He is the author of books like Innovation Generation, Innovation Never Stops, and his most recent book is ISO 56000, Building Innovation into Your QMS. So welcome. I want to let you know that this webinar has two parts. The first part will be Peter's awesome presentation, and then at the end, Q&A. So feel free, as you're watching the webinar, to leave your questions in the chat so Peter can address them at the end. So I hope you enjoy. Look forward to your questions at the end, and thank you very much. Peter, over to you. Thank you so much for being here.
Okay, thanks very much, Leonardo. Well, hello everyone. And ISO 56001 is the new innovation management certification standard. And you'll see from the year 2024, it is that new. What I'm going to do today is explain why this standard has become so very important. I'm going to explain how the standard operates, and I'm going to explain what you can do to prepare for using the standard. But first, why the standard has become so important. It's, first of all, an international standard. There have been national innovation standards, but this is international. It's been agreed by well over 30 national standards bodies. Its actual publication is September this year, and as Leonardo mentioned, I have been project lead on this standard. And the reason we have developed it is that demand has come from a number of quarters. There are financing organizations, for example, who want assurance, government bodies issuing grants, angel investors. And it's interesting when you look at investors, the failure rate is incredibly high. They are looking for some form of insurance that they're putting money into a well-run organization. Research a year or so back by IBM showed that 95% of innovators partner. Very few work in isolation. The idea of a lonely genius, quite honestly, is a myth. But perhaps most importantly, serial innovators. People are looking for a system approach so they can become serial innovators, not just a one-shot deal that we're always looking for what's next. And there's some very interesting research quoted in Harvard Business Review, an article by the late Clayton Christian Watson, one of the great names in innovation. And the research he quoted was that a poll by McKinsey showed that 84% of leaders felt that innovation was extremely important. But here's the crunch: 94% were dissatisfied with the results they were getting. They needed a better organized, a better structured approach. So what do we gain from this standards? Well, first of all, it gives us a future focus. It forces us to be looking ahead. It gives us a systematic approach. We are structured. And a lot of people say, well, how can you innovate with a system and structure? I will explain that. Remember, we're talking about managing innovation, not just the one small part, which is the ideation part. It enables serial innovation, and you'll see as we get into the standard, the continual improvement aspect of it always gets us looking for what I just said, that's next. Perhaps more importantly is that it avoids iteration. I think back to my world of R&D many years ago now, and we were constantly saying, well, it's an iterative process. Well, quite frankly, I don't accept that. It means that we didn't necessarily do it right the first time. Yes, there is a lot of learning when you're innovating, but you don't keep going back again. The system makes the whole process and the strategy much more efficient. And when speed to market is so important, it makes the overall approach much more effective. I think one of the most important issues and reason why innovation has become so exciting is that everybody can play. We get all the people in our organization engaged in the strategy and in the process. what we get is teamwork and achievement. We get results. There is space for people who are creative, as well as those people who are critical thinkers. And it's interesting to look at some of the work of the happiness guru, Martin Seligman. His work on happiness, and a lot of governments are looking at and using his work. His work has shown that what makes people happy is having meaningful relationships, in other words, good teamwork, and getting results. And that's what innovation provides, with the sense of achievement. Just quickly, let me give you the picture of the wide range of standards that exist in the 56,000 family. There have been well over 40 national standards bodies involved in creating the various standards. The opening standard in the series is ISO 56000. That gives us the vocabulary, the terms and definitions. It gives us the basic concepts. And importantly, it gives us the principles of innovation management. And I'll be talking to those in a moment. Then the series contains 56001, the requirements standard, which is the auditable standard. And that's my main focus today. And then 56002 is the guidance standard, which we completed back in 2019. The guidance standard quite often is written after the requirements standard, but we actually wrote it first, and that's actually worked out to be a good approach. There were a lot of people who doubted that a requirement standard was feasible. And I can tell you, from when I wrote the justification study several years ago now, I have had to overcome many obstacles before we could even get underway with the standard. There's a quote from Machiavelli, which I love to share, and that goes back to his book, The Prince, many centuries ago. He said, "Those who innovate will get little support from those who will benefit, and downright opposition from those who will not." So let me tell you, I don't want to put you off, but you've got to be tough and tenacious when you're an innovator. You need friends around you. And I had a lot of friends around me that helped us to get to where we are now. There are then a number of guidance standards. One on partnership, I mentioned already that 95% of innovators collaborate, partner. A standard on intellectual property, which explains the details of it. A standard on strategic intelligence, which begins right at the start of the standard, where we gather information. And then a standard on measurement. And I'll talk about measurement a little later. So there are 8 principles in the standard, and I'm going to go through them very quickly. The opening principle really derives from the definition of innovation that we have in 56,000. Innovation is all about the realization of value. And straight away, I have to say that I have a bit of a concern about the use of value. I prefer the word benefit. I mentioned earlier Clayton Christensen. He used to say that innovation makes life more convenient. Don't forget the emotional aspect of innovation. Don't just think financial. Innovation then, going to the second principle, is driven by future-focused leaders. They've got to be curious. They have got to explore. They need courage and be willing to take risk. They set direction. That's the third principle, strategic direction, but recognize that direction will change. There's a famous old quote that is attributed to a number of generals. I like to attribute it to Sun Tzu in The Art of War. No battle plan will ever survive first contact with the enemy. So be ready for your strategy to change. The fourth principle is about culture. And I remember when we first met as a technical committee back in 2013, we met in Paris, and I emphasized the importance of innovation culture. Behaviors are different when you're innovating. Peter Drucker is quoted as saying, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." They're both important, though. But the aspect of culture that I like to emphasize is that you need creativity to coexist with execution, and the two have different types of behavior. When I get to the clause on culture, I'll explain more of that. You might call the first four principles structural. Then we get into the action, the doing. And principle 5, exploiting insights, talks to how we go out and find opportunities, unmet needs out there, and then we find alternative solutions. But at this early stage, we're uncertain. And principle 6 is about managing uncertainty. And there's an important tool we use in innovation. It's the portfolio. And I'll talk about the portfolio. There's a clause devoted to it. Clearly, as we move through our journey, we have to be adaptable. I remember when we were developing these principles, one of the questions came up as to whether we should use the term adaptability or the term agility. We settled on adaptability because the term agility has kind of shifted in meaning. And then the final principle is a system approach, which pulls all of these principles together and which is absolutely fundamental to the standard that we're going to be talking about. It's worth saying at this point that all ISO management system standards follow what we call the harmonized structure. You're probably wondering what the graphic is here. Well, it's a piece of fractal geometry. I love fractal geometry. For me, it combines art and science. Anyway, back to the point. All ISO systems are structured along a harmonized set of clauses and a harmonized text. And 56001 and 56002 both follow this harmonized structure. And what that means is that if you're a user of ISO 9001, you will also be using this harmonized structure. And it's going to make it much easier for you to integrate 56001 because of the harmonized structure. And it's worth saying at this point, an effective quality management system is the platform for an effective innovation management system. And I've said it several times now, serial innovators have this system approach and are always generating new ideas. So let's talk about the system a little bit. The diagram you see on the screen now is a simple planetary structure which we developed back in the early days of writing ISO 56002. I like this model. It got overtaken though, and the model we actually have in the standard now is, I feel, a little overcomplicated. There's a simplicity in this original model that we developed. At the heart of the model, let me just give you a definition up at the top right-hand corner of what a system is. It's a set of interrelated and interacting elements. So a system has a number of elements: people, process, and technology. I'm not attempting to show all of the interrelations and interactions. I'm just showing you the concept here. The cycle which the standard follows is the plan, do, check, act cycle. In clause 6 is where we do the planning. Clause 8 is the doing. Clause 9 is where we check performance through measurement. And clause 10 is where we learn from that measurement and drive improvement. PDCA. And the hub of the cycle is the support clause, number 7. But there's actually more to it than that. A lot of people call PDCA the Deming cycle or the Shewhart cycle. They actually took the idea from some work that was done much, much earlier, back in, would you believe it, 1620. Sir Francis Bacon wrote a book called Novum Organum, and that's Latin for new method. It's what today we call scientific method, which you're all familiar with. And scientific method is more than PDCA. It's observe, plan, do, check, act. And that's what we do in clause 4 of the standard. We observe. You may be wondering, well, what happened to clauses 1, 2, and 3? They're just introductory. The action starts in clause 4, where we observe both externally and internally. And when we are innovators, we're looking for areas of opportunity when we observe externally. And when we observe internally, we're assessing our capabilities to deal with those opportunities. So that's where the action starts in clause 4. And then in clause 5, the job of leadership is to obviously carry out that strategic observation and then feed the knowledge into the plan, do, check, act cycle. And so this model is how we deliver innovation. So now I'm going to go deeper. Here are the specific clauses in the standard, and I've shown this diagram to give you an idea of what are the additional clauses that have been added in the case of innovation. The blue text that you see is the harmonized structure. For instance, in the first column, clause 4, context, 4.1 is understanding the context, 4.2, interested parties, 4.3, scope, and 4.4 is system. I'm not going to go through all of the blue text. You'll be seeing that as I go deeper into the standard. What I do want to show you, though, is that the add-ons for innovation management, additional clauses on top of the harmonized structure, are first of all in clause 5, leadership, where we've added in strategy and culture. Innovation is a highly strategic activity. You're very much looking into the future. And then in clause 6, we've added portfolio, structure. And you might say, why structure? Well, when you look at culture, you'll see why structure is important. We'll come to that. And then, of course, collaboration, which I've mentioned already many times. Clause 7, on the face of it, doesn't look as though there are any additions. That's because I've stayed at a relatively high level. But when we get to clause 7.1, resources, we'll see there are a lot of additional subclauses in that standard, and I'll talk about those. The other area where we've added clauses is in operations, clause 8. And we have a clause 8.2, initiatives, and 8.3, the innovation process. If you were looking at ISO 9001, you'd find all their additions are in clause 8. They actually go as high as clause 8.7. So that tells you that 9001 is very operational in its nature, whereas 56001 is much more strategic in its nature. So here's the first of those clauses, context, and it breaks into 4 subclauses. 4.1, which I'm going to go quite a bit deeper on, and that's where we look externally and internally at opportunities. 4.2 is interested parties, and that's where we start to identify who are the people that we're likely to be collaborating with and interacting with. 4.3, scope, you'll see has a small additional clause, innovation intent. That's where we express what the standards calls our aspiration, what we're aiming for in the world of innovation. It's also including its main part, which is scope. And then the last clause here, 4.4, is simply called establishing the management system. When I'm implementing with a client, this is where I get them to, well, I usually draft it for them, develop a document which shows the linkage between the standard and the actions in the organization. Let me go deeper on clause 4.1. The standard says the organization shall determine external and internal issues relevant to its purpose. That's the harmonized text. Those are very familiar words if you're a 9001 users. And that shows the alignment of the 2 standards. In the case of 56001, there is an additional bullet. Bullet C says, identify areas of opportunity for value realization. This is really important. This is what kicks off the standard for an innovator. And so this emphasizes that innovation starts with opportunity. And as we flow through the standard, you'll see opportunity is the driver. It's broad to start, and we gradually narrow it down, and we answer the opportunity with solutions. Just as a footnote, the standard has recently added in clause 4.1 all standards to address whether climate change is a relevant issue. So just wearing the auditor's hat for a moment, the auditor is going to ask to see, have you been looking for areas of opportunity? How have you looked for those? How have you gone out there scanning the business environment? And a couple of classic tools that are used here are the SWOT analysis. That was a tool developed by Albert Humphrey at Stanford University. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Quality management people are going to be looking at weaknesses and threats and reducing risk in those areas. In the case of innovators, we're going to be looking at opportunity, and we will use risk assessment to prioritize our opportunities. There is another tool that we use at this point, the PESTLE analysis: politics, economics, sociology, technology, legal, environmental, much more involved, as you can see. And we look for the change in those issues. Most companies would employ a market research company to do that. They wouldn't usually do it in-house. So this is the starting line. This is where we begin looking at areas of opportunity. Then we get to the leadership clause. And again, I've shown in red the add-ons, a couple of subclauses and a couple of major clauses. And you'll see we've moved from clause 4 in the outer ring to clause 5 in the second action clause. So let me take you through them. In 5.1, 511 is a general clause about leadership commitment. It's not really general. It's an action list for leaders. There are probably about 10 items in there. I'm not going to go through them now, but it's fundamentally about leaders taking responsibility for the management system, about ensuring that it is integrated with the business, that it's not a separate add-on. Then the clauses we've added in are 512 value realization. And if you look at 9001, that's customer focus, very similar in nature, easy to integrate. And then change management. I think you're starting to get that feeling already that we'll need to pay attention to change management. The second clause in the leadership section is policy. And I found a lot of companies that I've worked with in the past have very easily integrated innovation with their quality policy. The two add-ons, and I've shown you this earlier, the two big ones are strategy and culture, which I'll be talking about in a moment. And then organization roles and responsibilities. Don't take that casually. Roles and responsibilities are going to be new. Think about them carefully as you begin your innovation journey. So let me take you into strategy and culture. Strategy first. This, for me, is the big differentiator. It requires us that we maintain an innovation strategy flowing out of those areas of opportunity, that we show our strategic innovation objectives and how we're going to achieve them. Leaders will need to provide the necessary support and resources. And that might sound routine, but when we get to the resource clause, I'm going to say you're going to have to put a lot of guardrails in on your innovation resources. It's future focused. And if short-term needs arise, it is so easy to steal resources. I'll come back to that. The high-level strategic objectives provide, this went ahead. The high-level strategic objectives provide a framework for the later, more tactical objectives and for creating the innovation portfolio, which I will be talking about shortly. Strategy needs to be flexible and adaptable. When I talked about the principles, I already said that it's going to change. And let me give you an example of a couple of companies that have been strategic thinkers. Netflix started streaming movies back in 2007, but they started working on it well before that. And even in 2007, you might remember, we'd only just reached 3G on the internet. We're now at 5G. But Netflix saw the future. They were direct competitors with Blockbuster. In fact, they had a very similar business model to Blockbuster. But Netflix looked ahead, and Blockbuster went out of business. Another company that took a very difficult business decision was IBM. Back in the 90s, they sold off all their hardware business. I remember talking with IBMers at the time. They were horrified because that was the core of their business. You know, laptops and PCs, even mainframes. But they realized that hardware was going to be a commodity. They bought Lotus Notes as their first step into artificial intelligence, which they knew was where the future was going to be. So forward thinking is what this standard is all about. But you heard me say already that culture eats strategy for breakfast. Well, they're both needed. And it keeps doing this to me. A lot of people say, can you possibly audit culture? There's an old saying, those who say it can't be done shouldn't get in the way of those who are already doing it. I've audited culture. I've been auditing innovation for a number of years in a particular government entity, many different parts of that government. And believe me, it is very auditable. It's auditable in its elements. And let me come to that. In the standard, it says top management promotes the culture by, first of all, analyzing current culture. And if you want an assessment tool, I can provide that for you if you're interested. I'll be giving you my email address at the end of the session. And I'm very happy to give you access to a culture assessment tool. But then the standard says, consider the following characteristics. And this is what the auditor is going to be looking for. The coexistence of creativity and execution. Are they both healthy? Is there openness to change? Are people in the company taking risks? Are the risks calculated? Are people collaborating? These are all aspects of culture. Is there exploration? Are you going out there to see where are opportunities? Are you experimenting, trying things out? And are you asking the right questions? Also, is there diversity in the sources of knowledge? And when we say that, we mean, is it coming from different backgrounds? That's why you collaborate externally in order to gain diversity. We're now into clause 6, planning. And you will see a lot of clauses. 1, 2, and 3 are the harmonized structure clauses. We do in 6.1 the risk assessment. And this is different from 9001, clause 6.1. We found areas of opportunity. And what we do in clause 6.1 is prioritize those through risk assessment. In 9001, you would prioritize in terms of how you're going to reduce risk. We approach risk in a slightly different kind of way when we're innovating. We use it as a tool to narrow down our opportunities. We then set objectives and we create a more detailed plan. We had our broad strategic plan in the leadership clause in 5.3. Now we get more granular. Then there is clause 6.3, which is the change clause. And it's a little bit out of sequence here. And this is simply dealing with if you are facing big change in your organization. And that could happen if you decide to change your structure. And that's coming up shortly. The portfolio 6.4, I've mentioned several times. And that is a very valuable tool for managing resources. And don't take this for granted. I can tell you, when I've implemented innovation management using 56002, there was a lot of fighting between vice presidents. They didn't like the portfolio because there were hard numbers there, whereas previously they'd been able to use politics to get resources. So very valuable and deserves a lot of attention. You heard me mention structures earlier, and that's going to change depending on your approach to culture, the coexistence of creativity and execution. And like I said a second ago, if you've got major change here, you'll plan it through clause 6.3. And then clause 6.6, collaboration. I'm going to go into that more deeply, and I'm going to go into 6.4 more deeply in just a moment. So an additional word or two about structure, different approaches you can follow here. Probably the oldest, best known method is something that Lockheed Martin used. Would you believe back in World War II, they spun off their research and development. They called it skunk works. It's a sort of popular term in the world of innovation. Procter and Gamble, going back just 20 years ago, they actually subcontracted all their innovation work. The method I like, though, is one that was developed by W.L. Gore. Bill Gore left DuPont and started his business in outdoor fabrics. You've probably not heard of W.L. Gore, but you probably have heard of Gore-Tex, and still a multi-billion-dollar company. And they were the company that first started many, many years ago, self-managed teams. So in terms of structure, think about self-managed teams. I've worked in that environment. When I worked with Phil Crosby, we used self-managed teams, very effective. So let me go into portfolio and collaboration. Your portfolio needs to align with your strategy, and it needs to have the criteria for evaluating your various initiatives. You're going to balance things like risk versus return. The standard uses the term degree of novelty. I don't like that. I think it trivializes. I prefer degree of difference. In other words, how different are you from other offerings? And obviously, technology readiness is a factor in portfolio. It doesn't say in the standard, but you use your portfolio for communicating with the leadership on your progress. We're in the planning clause, and a lot of people say, can you possibly plan innovation? Well, yes, you can. And Tesla is a great example of that. Tesla got to market through very careful planning. They have a complex supply chain. They needed charging stations. They had no dealerships. You don't just go into that casually. So innovation, and I think you're starting to see this now, is something that we plan carefully. Collaboration, again, you've heard me mention several times. What people often forget or overlook with collaboration is the key question, why are you collaborating? You need to specify clear objectives, and the auditor's going to look for that. Why are you collaborating? And it'll come from your strategy. Your collaboration must be aligned with it, obviously. What you look at is, what are our existing competencies and resources? Look at what you need to add to what you've already got. Skills that are missing, you may choose to develop them yourself, or you may choose to outsource them. But be careful. The moment you start to collaborate, you have got intellectual property issues, and you want to think about how you protect the IP you're creating. You'll probably have non-disclosure agreements, but think very carefully here. I'll come to IP a little later. And when you are collaborating, one of the reasons you do it is to get a different perspective. You want different people from your own. And so when you're in that diverse environment, life can become stressful. So we need to think about respect for others' point of view, openness and sharing. and building trust between ourselves and other organizations. It's not a casual thing that you go into. It's not a case of having a couple of drinks on a Friday night. That's not collaboration. It's something you think through very carefully, but it's essential. Now we're into the support clause, and we've got 5 main clauses here, but resources has a lot of additions. This is the hub around which the standard revolves. And competence, awareness, communication, documentation, standard, harmonized structure, standard clauses. I'll just say a word about competence, and that is that people often just say innovation is a competence. No, it's not. There's a lot more to it than that. You want, as well as creativity, you want critical thinking. You need project management, and you need to think carefully about the many competences you're going to need. When we look at awareness, I like to add in engagement as well. And document management, think carefully here, particularly in those early stages when you're doing that what if work at the beginning of a project. So I'm going to go deeper on 7.1 resources. Now look at all these extras that we've got. People, clearly, the source of knowledge, time and money. You're probably looking at the picture we've got on this screen and saying, what on earth's that got to do with it? Well, it is about time, that's the clock, and money. The clock is actually my grandfather's clock. And the money, well, those are Canadian dollars. Back to the clauses. Time and money, they need careful planning. Remember, time is not infinite. So far, you've not got any finance coming in, so you need a financing resource. The business I ran in the UK, fortunately, as we were growing rapidly, corporate financed us. But you need a source. Knowledge, it's not knowledge management, it's really the management of knowledge. But what matters here is storing and retrieving knowledge as you progress. Intellectual property, that's vital because you want to be monitoring the external world. You want to be ensuring the protection of what you've got inside. And tools and methods, you've heard me mention many tools as we've moved along. So think of knowledge as being where you capture, classify, and protect your knowledge, and where you acquire knowledge from many sources. The most important thing is the ability to retrieve knowledge. So that classification and the ability to retrieve knowledge is vital. And on intellectual property, look outside to make sure that someone else hasn't already patented what you've got. Beware of trolls. I can tell you, when I worked with BlackBerry, they suffered from an IP troll. They developed a concept, the troll quietly watching all the time, and then as soon as a company starts to make money from a new offering, the troll steps in and sues them. So look outside to see if someone else has already patented the concept that you're developing. So at the same time, protect your intellectual assets, clarify ownership of intellectual property. I can proudly say that I'm an owner of a patent, but I don't own it on my own. There are 2 other people in the company. We shared the ownership because we were all involved in the development. And you should keep an inventory of your intellectual property and constantly review it. Now we're into operations, which is really the innovation process. And 8.2 is an add-on. It's really a kind of checklist when you're getting into more detail in your initiatives. I'm not going to go through all these subclauses because I'm going to go deep on them already. And just referring to the cycle, you'll see we're at the doing part in the plan, do, check, act cycle. Here's the process. Remember, we started with areas of opportunity. We've been narrowing them down gradually, and now we're at the actual process itself. A lot of people think innovation starts in the laboratory. No, it starts in the marketplace with unmet need. And where people often go wrong is when they find a need, they don't define it. They straight away jump into creating ideas because it's so much fun. The concept stage comes next, and great quote from Linus Pauling. He said, the best way to get a good idea is to get lots of ideas. But then he said, and throw away the bad ones. That's the validation step. We collect data on the various concepts and we analyze which are the preferred concept solutions. So you see, we're narrowing down even further. And then we get to the development stage. We may take 2 or 3 options into development. At this stage, that's where I was always very, very close to the customer. You've got a potential customer in mind now, and you work so closely with them. You're developing a working solution beyond a concept. And then finally, you deliver. The tendency to think it's game over when you're in R&D once you've developed it. But to quote Thomas Edison, genius is 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration. So let me take you into first the creative processes. So when we're identifying opportunities, we're looking for unmet needs. And in the standard, it says stated and unstated needs. Very often, the potential customer will not even recognize there's a need there. This is where we use techniques like ethnographic research. There's a great story from Lego. They were in trouble 20 years ago. Nobody wanted to buy kids' bricks. They went and watched kids play to find out what was wrong with their business. And they discovered very quickly that when kids play, they're not just putting bricks together, they're telling stories. They talk to their toys. And so Lego built stories into their product. That's what ethnographic research does for you. It's just the same as Gemba in the world of quality. Gemba is out on the shop floor, ethnography out in the marketplace. So you find your opportunity. And again, I'm not apologizing. You then define it. And I keep saying, this is where people go wrong. I'm going to give you yet another quote from Einstein. He said, if I had an hour to save the world, I'd spend 55 minutes defining the problem. You need a good definition here. Then we go on to the concept creation. And this is the brainstorming, the ideation, and don't minimize it. It's not one 20-minute brainstorming session. It goes on over a period of time. And some of the best ideas come between sessions when people relax. Rather like Archimedes, when he got his solution to the king's crown and the concept of specific gravity. He got that when he relaxed. He was taking a bath. So there are many techniques. Spread them out, use different techniques, and importantly, give people the facility to record ideas between sessions. Then we get to the execution. We collect data on the various ideas, we analyze them, we shorten our list, and then we move on to developing the solutions. A lot of people question whether creative problem solving is really necessary, but I would say it's extremely valuable. I would definitely use it. But once you've done it, get the data, shorten your list, and then get into developing working solutions. And then when you come to deliver your solutions, you've got to think about having a good value proposition, and also start to think about scaling. People have said to me in the past, well, you don't need to worry about scaling. Yes, you do. And I say to people from first-hand experience, if you don't think scaling is important, you've clearly never had a successful innovation. I can tell you, cash flow, new people, those are the things you've got to think about as you scale your new solution. Now we're into measurement, and I'll get into specifically key performance indicators in a moment. But there's a couple of other clauses I'll quickly cover off now. Internal audit, I like to call that self-assessment. When I worked with IBM and with AIG, they couldn't use that term because it meant something completely different. It was a financial term. So they called it internal process review. I like that approach. Management review, a vital, this is the engine that drives the whole system. But let me get into measurement and tell you some of the secrets of innovation management. The standard has got some fairly standard ISO words, what needs to be monitored and measured, which KPIs you use, who owns the measure, remember to record your results. And there are different types of measures. You can measure inputs like resources. You can measure throughputs like speed. You can measure outputs, adoption of your idea, and you can measure results like return on investment. I would say outputs and results are seriously lagging indicators. If you look at successful innovators like the Mayo Clinic, they measure those input indicators, the support, the training, the effectiveness of collaboration, and so on. And the metrics you use are going to be different. They'll be more granular. They won't be granular. They'll be more binary kind of measurements, go, no go, yes, no kind of measurements, or the project management measures, red, yellow, green, those sort of things. So a little different from your normal measures at the start, but that's what drives your process. And then finally, the improvement clause. And this is what you use to ensure that you are continuously looking ahead, continuously driving improvement. The standard does contain non-conformity and corrective action, which 9001 users will be very familiar with. And this is at a system level. This is what you use for dealing with weaknesses in your system, especially after you've done that internal process review or internal audit. So these are the added clauses that I've taken you through in leadership, strategy, and culture, in planning, portfolio, structure, and collaboration, in operation, initiatives, and process, and those additional sub-clauses or sub-clauses that I've shown you. So what can you do now? Well, you've got 56002 as guidance. You can go to my book, which is published by Quality Press. It's called ISO 56000, Building an Innovation Management System. And the link is here. I've got an article that's going to be published in Quality Progress in September. And if you need me to send you either of the links on these, there's my email, pm@petermerrill.com. If you're already 9001 certified, you should start talking to your certification body. And obviously, Innovation Cast is going to be here to work with you. And you'll see that the two email addresses are below. And I'll be handing over to Leonardo and Carlos in a moment. But I think, Leonardo, you want to do the Q&A first. Am I correct?
Thank you, Peter. Yes, we're going to proceed with the Q&A. Thank you for your presentation. I'm really sorry for the visual issues with the slides, but I think hopefully everyone got the message. We can share the slides afterwards, I think. And for now, we will start with the Q&A. We have a few questions that we got from the participants up front. We asked them to share questions during the registration. And also, if there are more questions, you can still submit them using the Q&A. So the first question, Peter, I think it's basically about, who is this for? So is this for any kind of organization? Is it suitable for all industries and all types of innovation?
Definitely. The way we write standards is that, and this is fundamental to all ISO management systems, is that it can be applied to any kind of organization, not just an organization producing a tangible product, but a service organization, a software organization. It can be applied to not-for-profits and government organizations. So we're very careful in writing standards so that it has got complete applicability. When we pick our words, we pick them extremely carefully. So yes, all types of organization.
Good, thank you. The second question is about the certification process. I don't know how much we know so far about this because it's still not published, right? But I think the question is about, okay, how long would it take to become certified?
All right. Usually an organization will start with a gap analysis. And during that gap analysis, agree on what is the scope of the innovation management system. And be careful here. Don't try and just do it in your R&D section because that won't work. You really need to do the whole organization. Once you've done the gap analysis, that'll give you an idea of how long it's going to take to develop the system. Typically, I would say about 9 months is what you could expect for developing the system. But a lot depends on how much you're already creating new or innovative offerings. That's a factor. Once you're satisfied that you've got a system that's working, it's a requirement in the standard that you do that internal audit. And that'll tell you whether you've got any remaining gaps. At the same time as you do your internal audit, you should be talking to the certification body. If you are a 9001 user, you've probably already got one. If you're not, you should look at, I would suggest, 2 or 3 alternative certification bodies and ask them to quote you for 56001 certification. The actual certification depends on the size of your company, the time required. If you're a small to medium enterprise, you probably need 1 or 2 auditors for 1 or 2 days. The certification comes in 2 stages. they will do, first of all, a stage 1 audit to make sure your system is in place and that you're not wasting your time and their time. It's probably just one auditor for a day that'll do the stage 1. And then if they're satisfied, you've got a system in place, usually it'll come about 4 to 6 weeks later, they do a stage 2. And that's the full audit. And again, it depends on the size of your company, how many auditors and for how long.
Good, thank you. The next question is about, whether or not the standards can be customized to fit the specific needs of companies. So, what are like the degrees of freedom to implement?
The way the standard, all standards are written, they're not prescriptive. They don't specify that. For example, you heard me right at the beginning talk about a SWOT analysis. That's up to the company which tools they use. In the standard, it simply says identify the external and internal issues that affect the company. And that's a very broad statement. And clearly, you can then decide what methods you use for doing that. So the how is very much up to the company itself. The what is clearly specified in the standard. So you can't leave out that initial assessment. You have to find out what those issues are. And as you progress through the standard, the actual requirements have to be met, but how you meet them is very much up to you. So there is a high degree of freedom on the how part.
Good. So next question is about, I guess, what kind of training and development programs are recommended for employees to understand and contribute to the ISO compliance? You mentioned collaboration and you did some remarks about, involving more people. So how does this work?
Okay. Usually with a project like this, you'll have a core team. And I'll come back to the core team. For people generally in the company, there is a clause in the standard, clause 7.3, which requires that people throughout the company are aware of the system and how it works. And clause 7.4 kind of underlines that with the communication on a regular basis. But 7.2 competence is where we specify the unique competences that are needed. Some people will need training in project management if you haven't already got that. Mm-hmm. Others will need training in critical thinking. That is a necessary skill. And obviously, the creative problem solving is something that gets a lot of attention. And so that tends to have training that goes hand in hand with the actual creative problem solving. Coming back to the core team, though, what I would say is, depending again on the size of the company, a cross-functional team is what you should be having. You don't just have people from R&D. You need people from the marketing end of the business. You need people in the operations part of the business. All of them need to be engaged in that core team. And all of them need to understand how the standard works. A session probably rather like I've given today, but much more customized to the company itself. And that usually flows out of the gap analysis that I mentioned.
Very good. So the majority of our customers, they have like innovation management teams or innovation management departments. I guess they will also be, part of the core team working on this.
Yeah.
So the next question is about the life cycle of the certification. So how often this needs to be reviewed or updated? It's like when I ask if it is expensive, I think it's in terms of work.
Yeah. So the initial certification is good for 3 years. And at the same time, the certification body will return on an annual basis to make sure that everything is working, that people haven't gone to sleep on the system. They will normally look at management review to see that leadership is engaged. They will look at the internal audit to see that that has been carried out. And they will look at that. If you've done a SWOT analysis, they'll look at what are the changes that have occurred in the course of the year. And they will obviously look at the strategy and how that has changed in the course of the year. Cost, that varies again depending on the size of a company. I would say if you are talking about a company of say 50 to 100 people, and I won't be quoted on this, it's very much a guesstimate because there are a lot of factors here, probably around about $20,000 to $30,000 over the 3-year period, something of that order. It's definitely not hundreds of thousands or anything like that.
That's good to know. So it's available even for smaller companies, which is good.
Oh yeah, yeah.
That's very good. Next question is about challenges. So what kind of challenges might we face while adopting the new ISO?
I would say, for me, one of the biggest challenges is culture development. And what I recommend is that people actually start their process at the same time as they start their strategy. As I went through the standard, the process came much later in the standard. But I would say you would begin your innovation process in parallel with your strategy. And it's actually your process that you use to develop your culture. And very definitely carry out that culture assessment that I mentioned. And I can provide access to the innovation culture assessment, which we have on our website, if people would like to run through it. The culture change is not quick. By the time you're certified, you're likely to have the culture developed, but not fully implemented. You'll be doing the various things like exploring, collaborating, experimenting. You'll be doing those things, but they won't be necessarily second nature by the time you go for certification. So I would say that is one challenge. The other, I would say, is putting meaningful measurements in place. And I talked about measurement at the end of the presentation. You should expect those, should we say, imprecise measurements at the early stages, but they are very, very necessary. They're what drive the process. If I would pick out a third area that's a challenge, it's a different kind of challenge. It's something not to overlook. That's intellectual property, and deal with that very carefully right at the start. The moment you get what you think is a good idea, you should be talking to your legal counsel. With that patent that I had, the moment we got the idea, we talked to our legal counsel. I actually thought at that time it was going to be a registered design, and counsel said, no, this should be a patent. So getting that advice early on is very important.
Okay, thank you. Next question, I guess, is related, and you're giving some tips already. So any other success factors that come to your mind?
Obviously, the ultimate success factor is delivering the solution. And what I would give here is a piece of advice to ensure you get that success and delivery. And that is to, once you get past the concept stage, or even at the concept stage, engage with your potential customer. You need to find someone who is, shall we say, hot for this idea that you've developed. Very often you may have a customer that is driving the innovation. You know, they are saying, look, we need a new kind of solution to this particular service or product. So that's the ultimate success factor. On the way to getting to that solution, I would say when you're at the ideation stage, the creative problem solving, you want to see that there are a wide range of different solutions being generated. I would say another factor that comes out of that is comprehensive engagement of the people in the company. People like this, that people enjoy the creative work. It's a lot of fun.
No, that's very good advice. Actually, when we started our company, we did a lot of different things before working on innovation management. And we started working on innovation management in 2010. And we did it actually because of a specific pain from a customer. And we didn't get the solution, so we went to build something. The comment that you've made about participation, I think that's something that we see a lot. Is like this opens up the possibility for people at the organization to participate in innovation activities, and a lot of people, they have this entrepreneurship mindset. So I think this is good news for those people to be involved. Right. So next question. I don't know if there's a lot here, but what are the anticipated future developments and updates to the certification that will be upcoming this year? And how should organizations prepare for them?
Right. Once the standard is published, and it's going to be published in September, it receives a systematic review, typically after a period of 5 years. And if in that 5 years we see that there has been a significant change in the needs of the standard, it would then be revised. For instance, looking out 5 years from now, we may find artificial intelligence has an impact on the way that innovation is carried out. And that might affect the standard. But that systematic review is always carried out. We may find that the standard actually works perfectly well and there's no need for an update. The systematic review usually takes about 2 years. So normally it's about 7 years out if a new standard is issued. So people can feel confident that the standard we've got now is going to be good for the next 7 years.
Very good. Also, a live question from Bashir. He says that basically he's an auditor in the quality management. What should he do to become a competent ISO 56001 auditor?
Okay. So I can tell you what we're doing at the moment, Bashir, and that is we are developing a version of 17021. That is the standard which the certification bodies have to comply with. There is a version for 9001, and then there are special versions for other standards. For instance, 17021-2 is for environmental management, and that includes the skills and knowledge that are specific to an environmental auditor, things like aspects and impacts, life cycle, and so on. So the version we are going to be developing with ISO Casco will have the unique skills required, such as understanding business strategy, understanding the innovation process, and so on. That doesn't mean to say that a certification body has to wait for that. A certification body would be able to provide training in advance of the publication of 17021. And I would say that the best approach here, Bashir, is talk to your certification body about this.
Okay, last two questions. I think this one you already addressed part of it. So how does the new certification promote a culture of innovation within the organization?
Yeah, if you go to clause 5.4, which is about culture, it lists out very clear behaviors. You know, culture, there's an old definition of culture going many years back. It was in the book published by Deal and Kennedy. It was the first book on culture. And their definition of culture was the way we do things around here. It's about behavior. So to promote a culture of innovation, you need to promote certain behaviors. You can make it complex, but I keep it simple. I say at the outset, 3 primary behaviors that you need to develop. Exploration, going out there in the marketplace, seeing what the unmet needs are, rather like Lego did, watching kids playing. What are the unmet needs that your company could fulfill? Exploration. Collaboration. That's one you can start everybody on early on, getting used to working in a diverse group. And there was some great work done many years ago at Caltech, which showed, it was, his name's just come back to me, Professor Scott Page. He did some research on the effect of IQ on problem solving. And what he found, to his surprise, was that a diverse group of people will produce, are better at problem solving than a group of Mensa people. So that was interesting. So exploration, collaboration, and experimentation. Always be willing to try things out. Avoid spending lots of money before you experiment. Do your experimenting on a confined basis before you get into investing. So those are the 3 things to promote: exploration, collaboration, and experimentation.
Very good. Last question. I think this is the easiest one. What are your thoughts about the skepticism regarding certifying innovation and the perception that it intends to prescribe a one-size-fits-all way to manage innovation?
A lot of people tend to think that creativity is the only thing that happens in innovation. And I think you've seen, as I've walked you through, that it's only one part. And that part is not prescribed in the standard. Even the innovation process is a process. And I always quote creative activities as following a process. If you look at writing, If you look at painting, if you look at composing music, I don't compose music, but I do write and paint. When I paint, I follow a process. All artists do. If you're painting in oils, you go from dark to light. If you're painting in watercolor, you go from light to dark. If you're painting in watercolor, you use soft brushes. If you are painting in oils, you work with hard horsehair brushes. And those are general approaches. They're not specific. You can break those rules if you want to, but there is still an essential process. So what we're certifying is the management of innovation. And you heard me quote Edison, genius is 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration. And that's where things go off the rails, where you do not move through your strategy quickly and efficiently. That's what the standard is bringing to the table. So that's my short answer. I could talk all day on that one.
Thank you very much. I think we covered all the questions we got. Thank you for the great presentation and for the insights. What we'll do is we'll share the slides and also your culture assessment questionnaire with your permission, so people can know more about it. They have also your contact. So thank you everyone for attending, and I wish you a very good day.
Thank you, everybody.